Michael got sick, and just like any other kid, he got a stomach bug, he had a fever, just didn't feel good, real lethargic, wanted to sleep all the time. So he actually fell asleep on the couch. I picked him up, took him to bed, laid him to bed that night. Amy came home later. We went to bed, we checked on the kids, they were fine when we went to bed. Amy heard some moaning from his room, and so we thought, well, maybe he's not feeling well and he's, moaning in his sleep or something. And so I went in there. He was very stiff and cold, but he was still doing like the moaning, and his breathing was real shallow. And so I picked him up and I took him into our room. And so I told Amy, I said, something's really wrong. We need to call 911 or something like that. And then the ambulance arrived a few minutes later. They started to give him oxygen. They checked his pulse, and they moved him to the ambulance.
We were kind of losing our minds. They were on the phone with Children's Hospital trying to figure out what our next steps were, and it seemed like minutes after we were at the hospital, they had the Columbus Hospital on the phone and had arranged for transport for life flight, and they life flighted him up to Columbus.
Sitting in that waiting room I remember people being there, but I don't remember who. The only person that I remember being there obviously is Amy, and that's because she had her hands on my shoulders, and she was sitting over me on a chair. I couldn't even sit in a chair. I was on the floor, and
I kept thinking, like, he just has a flu. He had something going on at school, and it took forever for them to figure out what was going on. The doctors kept coming in. We had this isolated waiting room where tons of people were gathering together from the church and our family, and we had family fly in because the doctors were telling us, it's not looking good, and we started to hear things like, you just need to prepare yourself. And that's when it hit me that, Michael, it wasn't just a flu. There was something seriously wrong that we had no idea about.
I remember the nurse coming in, like, just tunnel vision. That room was probably, I don't know, 10 or 12 feet wide, but felt about 2 feet wide when that woman came in, and I remember her kneeling down in front of us, and she told us that his organs had started to shut down, and his heart wasn't beating on its own, and he wasn't breathing on his own, and she said, she used the word ECMO life support, and I didn't even know what it was, but she said, we want to put him on ECMO life support in order to give us more time to figure out what's going on.
It was hard. Like, nothing seemed to work. I remember at one point, I looked at Mike and I was telling him, we might be attending a funeral at the end of the week. We might be picking out pictures and a coffin. It became very real when he got put on life support, because not only was his body and none of his organs were operating, his heart wasn't beating and his lungs weren't working. We didn't know what his brain function was. His liver wasn't working, his kidneys weren't working. His extremities were turning blue because of the lack of blood flow. We didn't even know why that was happening. So I felt like it was becoming almost hopeless.
I remember feeling so lost, and it just felt like the whole world just fell away, and I was just in this little room, and nothing existed outside of it. And it was at that point that I started asking those questions. Where is God in this? What is happening to Michael? He's 2 years old. Why is this happening? Why is he sick? Why would God let this happen?
It started from the home to the local hospital all the way up to Columbus Hospital. One of us is like breaking down, and just our thoughts were scattered and we were hysterical. and the other person would have to be there to kind of comfort us and pull us together. And I remember at one point I looked at Mike and I said, Mike, I need you to be strong because I have to have a moment. I need a moment to just break down, and I need someone to keep it together. And we were both losing it in the beginning. When Michael was on ECMO, we would have people come back if they were willing to go see him. I wanted people to pray for him. Mike and I wanted nothing more than people to pray. I mean, if they would come up and visit, that was okay, and cards were okay, but we would plead for people to not just say they'd be praying, but to get on their knees and actually pray. That's all we wanted. And so I would have, when people would come up to visit, I would say, do you want to go see Michael? We had tons of people, one by one, would go back into his room and look at him, because I thought if they saw his face and they saw, I mean, like I said, his arms and legs were blue. He had so many tubes, you couldn't even recognize him. I thought they might be more apt to pray for him.
We had all kinds of visitors at the hospital with us. They would come and go, and as they're leaving, more people are coming. They were always there. And we had people put money on the family card for us to buy meals and pay whatever medical bills we needed or whatever while we were there. We had a group of people who opened an account and started throwing money in there for after we were out of the hospital. And so it was unifying to see that those hands and feet of the church.
The church was everything. I mean, they kept our jobs, they kept our kids, they decorated our house for Christmas, they provided financially. It was everything. And I don't know how people who aren't believers make it through times like that. I don't know how people who don't have any hope can make it through such a difficult time or a tragedy. I mean, the church they were there providing everything for us. You know, to see God move through hands and feet of real life people is greater than any mystical, realm that you hope would show up one day. I mean, to see people sacrificing so that we could, be there for our son meant everything. Everything.
And I remember after they had talked to us about ECMO and they told us that he was going into surgery, I remember just the exhaustion of everything. I felt, looking back on it after a couple of days, I felt really weak because of everything going on, and I'm falling asleep. But I did. The exhaustion of everything, I fell asleep. I passed out in that little waiting room, and I'm always skeptical of people who say, oh, I saw a vision, or oh, I saw, I had this dream, or whatever, and this happened, and it's just this outlandish thing. But very, very real to me, very, very present to me was this image of Michael on an operating table, surrounded by all the doctors that we had talked to in that day, and then the most brilliant light next to him, laying right there on the operating table with him, this image of an angel. And at that point, that solidified it for me. I didn't need any other answers. I didn't need any other explanations at that point. And when they would come to us, almost every time that they came to us after that, it was good news or no news.
Every morning, all the doctors would gather around in the hallway, each patient's room, and at one point I remember asking the doctor, what are we getting any closer to finding out what's wrong with Michael? Have we eliminated some options? And he said, Michael is my top priority because he is the sickest patient here. And that didn't give me any peace because we were in ICU. He was the sickest patient there. But little by little, they brought in so many specialists, and they started to wean down what it could be, and they had kind of narrowed it down to either leukemia or HLH. I remember one day they had us come back, and his arms and legs had pinked up, and his blood had started to flow through them. And that was encouraging. They had started to try some new processes where they would filter out his blood every day and take all of his blood out while it was a cycle, and they would replace part of his blood with a donor. And they eventually tried to turn off the life support, and the first attempt wasn't successful. And so they waited a few more days, and then the next attempt they brought in every specialist that I could think of and then some. And I asked if I could be in the room when they turned off the life support, and they said, "We don't know if there's room for you." And I said, I'll squeeze in if that's okay. And I took a picture, and there were probably 30 people in a single hospital room. It was very, very crowded. And little by little they dialed down the life support and they turned it off, and Michael's heart was beating, and he was doing it. He was making it.
We talk about unity. We had obviously the church came, and we had family members come, and people fly in to see Michael and to make sure that we were okay. And we had a team of doctors. There were probably 20 doctors at every rounds that we did every morning, talking about what Michael's heart was doing, and what his kidneys were doing, and what his liver was doing, and what his bowels were doing, and every part of what what it was doing that day. Some doctors just came in, and they would come in and they'd say, "Hi, I'm Dr. So-and-so." I'd say, what department are you with? And they'd say, "Oh, I'm an attending from the 4th floor. I just wanted to come see the miracle kid." Or they'd say, I'm a first-year med student, and I was told to come up here and get his vitals because they said that he should have been dead." So doctors that we never met and never had any connection with Michael whatsoever were coming to see him and to hear our story and what happened, and they'd ask us questions. And so his story didn't just unify the church. It didn't just show the unity of the church. It showed the unity of people and how people come and they flock to something that God is doing.
But Christmas Eve came about, and so we loaded up everything that he needed, and we brought him home on Christmas Eve late at night, and our house had already been decorated for Christmas by family. That was the best Christmas present, having Michael home and being home with all of our kids. Even now, after years have passed, Mike and I will sit and look at our kids, and for a minute the thought sweeps across my mind, imagine if Michael wasn't here, and we would be looking at this family minus one. And it's heartbreaking. And then I think about, our family being whole, and, just the whole unit that we have as a family right now. We are overwhelmingly thankful. We don't take it for granted at all.
I don't presume to put myself on the level with Moses and Aaron and David and folks like that in the Bible that have stood against great adversity. But I felt like in that moment I had the resolve that they had. To know, not to think or to feel or to or to have some blind faith. I knew God had worked a miracle in Michael's life, and that he was going to continue to work a miracle in Michael's life.